Two topics to cover today, and you can see them on the board there. Fall of the Roman Empire, Rise of Latin Missions, which is one of my favorite lectures to give. There's a couple lectures that I really enjoy in this class, but I really do enjoy this lecture a bunch, and especially when we can get them together, because they're two bookends really of the same topic. And if I cover just the fall of the Roman Empire without getting to the rise of Latin missions or something like that, it can be sort of a downer of a lecture, but coupled with the rise of Latin missions, it can be, I think, a great experience for us. So that's what we're headed into today. Just because we're getting nearer the end of the semester, let me note with you that we have one lecture next week, and that's when your tutorials are going to be due. So, oh my goodness, we have 7 weeks and ticking. Now just 6 days, 23 hours, and 58 minutes before your tutorials are due next week at this time. Then we have mission conference, so we won't have class on the 10th of November, and then on the 17th of November, we have the book report due from Robert Louis Wilkin, which I hope is a treat to read. So dive into that a little bit early if you can. It's a little bit larger than the other books that I've asked you to read. Not terribly much larger, but let's see, what is that, about 300 some pages? Yeah, 350, about 370 pages. So it's a little bit larger than the other books that I've asked you to read, which means give it a couple more days of reading. It'll take you just a few more days of reading to get through that. And this is the last book that you'll be reading for this class. So, any questions about where we're headed? This is the part of the semester I like to liken it to that second little snack that they bring you out in the airplane. You know, you've been sitting in that airplane a long time and you're getting uncomfortable at this point. You're like ready to get off, but you can't. That's where we are, scholars, all together. So I'll come through the aisles and collect any service items that you may have one more time, and then we'll be getting pretty close to landing this thing. Do you have any questions about where we're headed from here? Any questions about where we're headed? How are your tutorials coming? Talk to me about those. And actually tell me how you feel about your tutorials, because I probably will not assign tutorials again in the future exactly this way, unless you just really loved it. But how are the tutorials going? I see some shrugs. I see a thumbs up. Please.
Can I just see if I understood the turn-in parts
Okay.
correctly? We're supposed to turn in the group evaluation sheets that are regarding us.
Exactly.
So I collect them from my group members.
Yep.
Those I handed in together with a document of my prepared presentation, which is between 1,000 and 1,500 words.
Precisely.
And
so you'll turn in the notes that you prepared in preparation to lead the tutorial, and then also you'll collect the physical evaluation sheets, and then send in some sort of audio recording or digital recording of the experience. And our teaching team won't hardly review that, but they'll drop into a 30-second or 20-second chunk through the, here and there. They'll spot check just to make sure that you're not.
So the audio is through email, and the rest is turning on the 3rd of November.
Let's see. Actually, Palmer, do you have a particular say? I think it'd be most convenient to do everything by email, as long as you're willing to let us do that to your inbox. Okay. So Palmer is willing. Please send those directly to Palmer. Yep, and by email, just to have everything in one place attached. It'd be great. Charles.
And so, since you said notes from our presentation, then is it okay to move within the word limit if instead of essay format, if we did a bullet point format?
I would recommend it. So, as the whole idea of the experience is that you get some teaching experience, and so that is what I'm trying to get out of it for your sakes. And as you'll develop your own styles as teachers, everybody sort of has their own note-taking style. You sort of develop your own idiosyncratic way of producing notes such that you work best with them. And so that's what I want you to begin doing. And probably it's almost always better not to fully manuscript things unless it's a formal lecture. We still do that at academic conferences and formal lecture readings. We'll still manuscript every word. But usually in a teaching context where you're teaching a class, you bullet point things, and that's what I'd like you to do here too. Or you outline them. Yep. Great, great. Amy,
So you don't prefer essay style? Is that?
you may do essay style if you wish, but I think it probably would not serve you as well as doing some sort of abbreviated form. Yeah.
Okay.
The idea is that when you're teaching, you have the information there that you need, but you don't necessarily have everything written out, except for very formal presentations, which we still do, for example, at the Athanasius lecture, something like that. Yep.
Well,
Good.
I do want to say that I love the tutorials.
Yes.
And I learned quite a bit.
Sweet.
So we heard from Matthew this morning, and that was amazing.
Cool. Before class. Whoa. Good. 6 to 7 tutorial. Awesome. Yes, please.
Well, first of all, I also really enjoyed getting to do this tutorial.
Oh, I'm glad.
My only problem is I'm having trouble figuring out how to get such a large sound file.
Okay.
Full tutorial through an email or even in Dropbox is having trouble.
Good. So it'll depend on the audio quality. And if you have a very nice audio recorder, it could be hundreds of megabytes, and then it would be too large for that. I think Google Drive can take almost any size document. You can transfer things by Google Drive. I've transferred documents up to a couple hundred megabytes that way. Good. Any other questions? Yes, please. Drew.
I think just one difficulty we found in this is I understand the reason, the size of the group and trying to teach and get more conversation going, but it is difficult to find 5 hours where all five of us with different work schedules, school schedules,
Okay.
small training schedules, we're all streaming 5 separate hours.
Got it.
A week or 2 week period.
Okay. Good. I appreciate that. Anything else, Charles? Tim?
How much extra material would you suggest reading and consulting beyond my information, beyond the actual giving and reading for the tutorial? The tutorial I was in this morning, he was very knowledgeable just from personal reading in different classes, and I think that contributed a lot to being able to have a conversation and him not get bogged down. So how much would you suggest, I guess, additional research?
Good. Yep. So I'd give it 2 hours or something like that, probably, in addition to the reading of the text yourself. And I think what you'd be wanting to do in that first 15-minute section would be, for those of you yet to do this experience, probably depends on the nature of the text. But if it's, for example, Ignatius's epistles, there the historical background is pretty important just to understand what he's saying. So in a text like that, much of your framing of the discussion might just be filling in the holes or filling in the gaps there so that people can have a smooth reading experience of what's going on or interpreting experience of what's going on. In a text like Book 8 of the Confessions, where it's really quite straightforward what's happening, it's just such a beautiful piece and such a rich psychological and spiritual piece. I'd spend most of your energy just opening up those different passages, which probably would have been understood first time reading through by your readers, but there's a lot more to explore and a lot of angles to look at. So good. Anything else? Tim.
You said that the notes for the presentation is more for our sake than not. So I was wondering what your opinion on the quotation would be then, and citation.
Good. Yep. You would want to put things there in your notes that either you want to, if it's a passage you want to discuss, just make a notation in your notes so that you can get back to the primary text and lead your group back to that primary text so that you can read the paragraph and sort of work it in as you need to. If it's something that you just want to refer to and keep moving, then a fuller citation would probably be best. Good. Good. Anything else in your minds? We will have you do teaching experiences in the future, but we'll have you do them in this museum experience. So it'll be a bit of a different format. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start to work on the rise of Latin missions. And, so slide back here say the fall of the Roman Empire? It doesn't. Well, it should say the fall of the Roman Empire. This slide should read the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of Latin missions. What is the fall of the Roman Empire? Some people, and this might be a more standard way of looking at Western civilization, when they're dividing up the historical periods of the Western world, when they're looking at Western civilization, they might have 3 big dates. You've got 753 BC. What's that, folks? You've got 476 AD, which I'll explain. You have 1453 AD, which I'll explain as well. But some people divide up Western civilization around these 3 dates. What are they? What's 753 BC? Hit it. Yes, yep, traditional dating of the founding of Rome. And the reason why we can be so specific with this date is because the Romans used this date themselves in their own chronography. So this is the date. Exactly how accurate it is, we don't even need to worry about, but they used this date for hundreds of years. 476 is the date that we're going to be looking at today. This is traditionally called the fall of Rome. And then what happens at 1453? Rome falls all over again. But the difference here is that 476 is the western part of the empire, and 1453 is the eastern part of the empire. Now, I'll explain that, why it is that we have two parts of the Roman Empire and how they both have this catastrophic fall, if you will. But these three dates could be used as the most basic of bookends to divide up Western civilization and Western history. Now, people speak of the fall of the Roman Empire, but what exactly are we talking about when we say that? In fact, I can submit to you that we probably today would not speak of the fall of the Roman Empire, except that Edward Gibbon wrote this book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Ironically enough, published in 1776. And since then, we've also often spoken of the fall of the Roman Empire. That's become a standard part of how we speak of the ancient world and what was happening in these events. But like all enormous historical terms, it can be misleading. And I want us today to, in the first part of this lecture, really unpack what is it that we're talking about when we speak of this fall of Rome? What does that mean? What was actually happening? And I would like to give you a picture of what's taking place at this time with enough resolution that you can really think through the process of what's taking place and think of this at least in a somewhat sophisticated manner. Now, to understand the fall of Rome, we have to understand the height of Rome, right? The whole idea of decline and fall has in it this idea of decline from some sort of glorious height. And what is that we're speaking of? Well, here this map refers to the Roman Empire as its most expansive geographical areas. So this is in about 117 AD. Trajan, Emperor Trajan, was emperor from 112 to 117 AD. And it was during Trajan's reign that the Roman Empire was at its largest geographical extent. Rome never got any bigger than this. Now, I want you to look at this just for a moment. I thought that I would run downstairs and grab out a bunch of like figurines from the board games downstairs, but then I thought, no, I better not. But wouldn't it be cool? Next time I need to bring some like little guys so I can push them around on the map. That'd be sweet. All right. So here's actually this is a little bit before 117, but during the first century, the boundaries were relatively stable. And if we looked carefully, we'd be able to see slightly different, Hadrian's Wall, for example, is not up yet, and some other things, but okay. And it looks like over in the 117 map, we have a little bit further extent down here into Arabia. So there must have been some conquest down there, but otherwise, largely these boundaries have been set at this time. Good, yeah, otherwise things look pretty much the same. Oh, okay, and over here, Hispania has been, Iberian Peninsula has been completely fleshed out as well in this last part of the first century and early second century. But otherwise, this map is pretty stable. Now, if you just look at the boundaries of this, what I want you to realize is so incredible, is just how large this thing is. There's no empire so large today. Modern politics, for whatever we think of them, can't, I think that's a fair word, can't make such an enormous block, a political block. So there is really something to the genius of the Romans and their ability to get such an enormous empire. If you were to look at the EU today, which is a conglomeration of, I think, currently 28 states in Europe and one of the most interesting things politically that's going on Earth today. If you look at this up from, of course, after the ashes of World War II, and I think founded in 1948, and then growing up till its current boundaries today, and it continues to add on countries. I forget when the last countries were added on, but not too long ago. If you looked at the EU today, you'd have something where the outlines that I've put around this map. And that is an enormous consortium of 28 countries. But the Roman Empire was bigger. Look, it extends all the way through here to the Middle East, through which, of course, in current political situation is quite chaotic, terribly chaotic there through Syria and the Levant. Egypt here, all this strip across North Africa was also part of the Roman Empire. So this is really just an enormous political bloc. This is what the Roman Empire looked like in the 1st century and early 2nd century. Now, when we speak of the fall of the Roman Empire, I suppose you could think of this process of decline that really begins in the 3rd century. The date that I'll give you will be 235 with the assassination of Alexander Severus. But I think we can start speaking, and I'm following very traditional sources here, but I think we can start speaking of the fall of the Roman Empire here in the middle of the 3rd century with something that I'll introduce to you as the crisis of the 3rd century beginning in 235. So if we're looking at this period of time here, we're looking at something well over 200 years. In fact, to put it in terms, to map that over in terms of American history, I'm telling you that the Roman Empire was falling for about as long as America has existed, okay, just to put this up in modern terms. So this is a relatively long process. It didn't just fall overnight. To follow Edward Gibbon again, many classical historians have praised the period of the 2nd century as one of the, just really the height of Roman power. Not only do we see this in the geographical extent of the empire, but also this was a time of flourishing, of tremendous output of literature, and classical culture was just bustling, just blossoming. We sometimes call this period the period of the 5 good emperors. So you remember that the Roman Empire begins with the Julian dynasty and then is followed by the Flavian dynasty. Remember, Nero is the last of the Julian dynasty, and Domitian is the last of the Flavian dynasty. And Nero and Domitian were generally bad guys. They're hated in Christian memory because they were terrible persecutors of the church. You probably know that just of their names, Nero and Domitian. Nero is the persecutor behind the persecutions alluded to probably in 1 Peter. And then, of course, also the persecutions that we discussed with the fire of Rome. And Domitian is the persecutor behind the book of Revelation. So these are not good guys in Christian memory, but they weren't good guys in general Roman memory either. These were the tail ends of 2 dynasties, and everybody was ready to be done with them. These were losers on all scales of Roman memory as well. Now, following Domitian as the last of the Flavian dynasty, we have the so-called 5 good emperors. And who were these folks? Who were these 5 good emperors? And I'll just give you their time periods. They will span 96 to 180 AD. This is a great time for Rome. This is a great time to raise your kids in the Roman Empire. That's what all the magazines were saying. Move to the Roman Empire. Retirement benefits are great. This is when it's all happening. Under these so-called 5 good emperors from this time period we have here, who were these folks? Nerva, reigning from 96 to 98 AD. Trajan, from 98 AD to 117 AD. I'm trying to figure out exactly what was the discrepancy here. I forget what part of the empire that he took over exactly in 112, but both of those dates are sometimes given for the reign of Trajan, and I forget the discrepancy there. But Trajan begins reigning in some capacity in 98 AD. Hadrian from 117 to 138 AD, and Antonius Pius from 138 to 161 AD, and Marcus Aurelius from 161 to 180 AD. Chase, can you just grab those things on the notes and plop them up? That would be great if you can do that for us. It'll save me a bunch of writing on the board. 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, ending in 1 AD. Now, all of these 5 good emperors, as they're remembered, were adopted. And that has something to do with the whole, this whole time period that we're speaking about as well. Remember, I've mentioned to you that the previous 2 dynasties in this empire were exactly that, dynasties. They were family lines. So emperors were putting their sons up next to be the next emperor, whether they were worthy administrators or not. That had nothing to do with the fact. It was a descendant. It was just a dynasty. So that got a lot of people like Caligula and Nero on the throne. There was a lot of nepotism going on, we would say today. However, the 5 good emperors, as all adopted sons of the emperor, had some sort of grooming process and were selected as emperor then in this way. They were adopted in as the children of the emperor so that they could be succeed the current emperor. And they tended to rule the empire in a worthy way. I have a little citation here from Edward Gibbon that I'd like to read to you, where he's praising this period of the so-called 5 good emperors. He writes this in his characteristic style: "If a man were called to fix the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would without hesitation name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the ascension of Commodus," that is, right, the guy who comes after Marcus Aurelius. "The vast extent of the Roman Empire was governed by absolute power under the guidance of virtue and wisdom. The armies were restrained by the firm but gentle hand of 4 successive emperors, whose character and authority commanded involuntary respect. The forms of the civil administration were carefully preserved by Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and then also Marcus Aurelius, who delighted in the image of liberty and were pleased with considering themselves as the accountable ministers of the laws. Such princes deserved the honor of restoring the republic had the Romans of their days been capable of enjoying a rational freedom." Okay, so this was a really good time for Rome. This is the moment, if you will, from which Rome is falling when we speak of the fall of Rome. And let's see, any of you seen Gladiator? Okay, a bunch of people have seen Gladiator. I usually get to see movies very, very late. I finally saw The Matrix for my 35th birthday. That was pretty sweet, 16 years after it came out. Anyway, yeah, so I'm a little behind the curve here, but I did see Gladiator not too long ago. It was actually about 4 years ago. And my wife hated the film because she's German. And do you notice the way the Germans are portrayed in that film? There's like these long-haired barbarians. It's like, what's up with that? Okay. Well, anyway, the thing about Gladiator that I want to draw your attention to is, do you remember where it was set historically? If there was history to it. Do you remember where this film sat? Right between Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, right? They both show up in the film, don't they? To my memory, they do. Well, that's for whatever other historical virtues of the film there may or may not be. That's why the producers of the film chose that time period. They're placing this drama about the rise of the barbarians and the political tensions that are mounting and the increased inability of the Romans to defend their boundaries against these Germanic tribes. The reason why that story is placed there between Commodus and Marcus Aurelius is Marcus Aurelius is the last of these so-called 5 good emperors. And this is the beginning, as it were, of the downfall of Rome. Nice convenient space to put a Hollywood blockbuster. Okay. Now, things remain relatively peaceful through the end of the 2nd century and the beginning of the 3rd until there's increased tension until what we call the crisis of the 3rd century. And that crisis of the 3rd century, I've given you the dates here, and that is going to tiptoe forward until eventually we're going to have the so-called fall of the Roman Empire. The crisis of the 3rd century. Rome almost collapses long before the 5th century. What happens? Well, there is increased tension between these Germanic tribes and between the Roman Empire. Up here on the north, you can see, okay, so what's missing if you look at, whoops, thank you so much for that, Chase. What's missing, if I can get my camera back here, thank you so much, I really appreciate all you're doing up there. What's missing from today's map of Europe and what we have here? Well, Northern Europe is missing. In fact, Northern Europe was never conquered by the Roman Empire. So there are blocks here of what we call and think of as Europe, right? If you're going to go touring over there and do some eating, you're going to want to eat some Scandinavian fish, right? Why isn't that on our map? Or we're going to, you know, drop down here to the Black Forest and have some good Rode Grütze or something like that. Anyway, why isn't that on the map either? These parts of Europe were never conquered by the Romans. And so now that explains then why the boundaries here, this is where the major parts of the tension is going to start growing in this period of the crisis of the 3rd century. Germany, Czech Republic, here, of course, the Scandinavian countries, up here to the north, the Scandinavian countries of Finland, Denmark, Sweden, so on, Norway. Those were never conquered by the Romans. Over here to the what we would think of as Eastern Europe with the Slavic countries, they were never conquered by the Romans. So it's from these areas, you can see the map here. This is the boundary right up there across from Northern and what we think of as Southern Europe today, where we're going to start getting this rise of political tension and where ultimately the boundaries of the Roman Empire are going to become weakest. Most of the other places have natural protections. Just look at them. Okay, North Africa, you're sandwiched up against the Sahara Desert. So you're not going to get invaders from the south there. That's a pretty stable boundary. Over here, you've got a sea to your advantage, and no one's coming from the far west. This is the end of the world, so you're pretty much invincible over there. You could get attacked over here, okay, or even below Egypt. If you follow the Nile down, there was an empire there called the Aksum Empire. You could have gotten some sort of political action down there, but they really didn't. Over here, this would have been another opportunity for Rome to have fallen, played out in some sort of alternate reality. You might have had a fall of the Roman Empire that came from this direction. The Parthian Empire was to this direction, and there were constant from antiquity, there were constant clashes between what we now think of as European societies and further Eastern societies on that basic boundary of the Levant. So there could have been some sort of political invasion here, but no, what actually happens in history is this boundary up here becomes weakened and eventually penetrated. So what happens with this crisis of the 3rd century? The Roman emperor, who's up there fighting with the Germans, trying to hold them off, is assassinated by his own troops. Why? Why is Alexander Severus assassinated in 235? And this is commonly seen to be, this is commonly seen to begin this crisis of the 3rd century. Well, Alexander Severus has a brilliant plan for how he's going to get the German off his backs. He's going to start paying tribute to them. Why don't we just start paying these Germanic chieftains to go away, to be at peace with us? So we'll just start paying tribute to them. Now, this infuriates the Roman soldiers because they can see what's happening. If we start paying tribute to these German chieftains, this whole thing's going to implode in on itself, was the fear. And so the troops took things into their own hands. They assassinated Emperor Alexander Severus. Now, this began a period of instability because what happens next is various generals within the Roman Empire start vying for power. What happens when your emperor is assassinated? No one knows. There's a lot of chaos that ensues. Now, before the close here of the 3rd century, we have various parts of the Roman Empire that are effectively splitting off to become their own mini Roman empires. I like to think of this a couple years ago. All the political heat. Texas was making, I think it was just saber rattling, so they say, nothing more than that. But Texas was making, or Texans, I don't know what was happening. We're talking about seceding from the Union, right? Well, what would have happened if that had actually happened? This is kind of what happens in the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. You have big blocks of the Roman Empire that pull away from an imperial administrative structure. And what's moving that is you have various generals, through military power, effectively ruling these big chunks of the Roman Empire. What happens? Okay. And I should say, too, that a continued weakening, so not only was there a lot of political instability and a lot of unknown factors taking place here at the beginning of the 3rd century, but also, do you remember the plague of Cyprian that we talked about? The plague of Cyprian from 251 to 270. It's hard to overestimate the significance of this plague, perhaps smallpox or something. We're not exactly sure what the blight was, but some terrible epidemic that set people into a terrible state of distrust. Many died, and there was just generally a depressed state of the people living in much of the Roman Empire at this time. Now, it's this deadly cocktail of circumstances that allow various parts of the Roman Empire to break up. There is a connection, if you look broadly at societies, there certainly is a connection between civil war and some of these other disasters like plague. When you get a lot of people dying, that creates shortages. It creates shortages of food, and when people get desperate, they stop trusting civil authorities so much. And when that happens, you do get fracturing in political structures. So that's exactly what's happening here in the Roman Empire. This whole thing is breaking up a little bit. Now, it's in 260 when we actually have this map here that I've got above starts to split. In 260, we have the Roman Empire. That's the red portion of the empire. Is my cursor showing up? Not really. The red, you can see it. The red part of the empire in the middle, still administered through Rome. But we also have the Gallic Empire. That's the green here in modern-day France and England. And then we have also, dividing in 260, the Palermine Empire. Palermine, P-A-L-M-Y-R-E-N-E. The Palermine Empire, which we see there is the western half, or excuse me, the eastern half of modern-day Turkey, Syria, Egypt, and so on. This Levant area. Now, these empires, this split of the empire doesn't last very long. In fact, it's only a decade and a half before things get back together. The Palermine Empire is reunited, so this yellow territory is reunited with the red area in 273. And the green, the Gallic Empire, is reunited with Rome in 274. So things come back together relatively quickly. But it's again hard to overestimate what this has done to people's imagination and understanding of what Rome is and what it means to be a Roman citizen. These are very shocking times, combined with the chaos that had been going on for several decades and the plague of Cyprian beginning in the 250s and so on. This was a very hard time for Romans. Okay. It's in 284 that we could say this crisis of the 3rd century momentarily stops. Now, so if I were trying to give dates just to the crisis of the 3rd century, it begins at 235, but it doesn't run all the way, obviously, to the 5th century. When does the crisis of the 3rd century close? we could think of the crisis of this 3rd century being these 50 years, more or less, 49 years, from 235 to 284. This more or less half-century period. Now, what happens in 284? In 284, the chaos stops for a moment or two, but at a very high price. Diocletian becomes emperor, and Emperor Diocletian, whom you may remember as the very worst of the Christian persecutors, he is going to make a pretty brilliant political move early on in his career when he's desperately trying to shore up power in the empire. His number one objective is to get the empire back together, to get things working in some sort of unified fashion after this half century of chaos. And he sets up a scheme called the Tetrarchy. The Tetrarchy. Bless you. The Tetrarchy. You can see there the word Tetrarchy comes from the Greek meaning 4 rulers. What Diocletian does is divide what was once conceived as the Roman Empire, the whole Roman Empire. He divides it into 4 regions. In a way, he is giving in to the realities that have become self-evident, that this whole Roman Empire is not going to function as a single administrative body administered from Rome. In one sense, he's giving up on that idea. The cultures are too varied. The political boundaries too expansive. There's too much of the world under one system. It's not going to run properly, and people won't accept that. So in one sense, Diocletian is giving into that reality. In another sense, he did bring some sort of lessened chaos and political unity back to the old Roman Empire that did give it a new lease of life. The scheme of the Tetrarchy was that there would be 2 Augustuses, or Augusti, and 2 Caesars. The Augustus would be the senior emperor, as it were, and each Augustus would have a junior emperor, as it were, that is a Caesar. So he's appealing to these old terms to divide up a new system of rule, and he divides the empire between eastern and western portions. Now, this is the first time in 284 where we've been speaking of eastern and western cultures and eastern and western parts of the Roman Empire. We've been speaking of those realities for some time now. Here's the first time you can actually see it with an actual line down the middle of the empire. The green on the left-hand side of this map, you can't green screen me in yet, can you, Palmer? I'd love to do the weather girl thing and point to different, okay. Maybe a future edition of the class. Good. All right. See the screen way up there, like 30 feet away? Imagine that I'm pointing at it in a way that you can see. Okay, the left hand here with the green, that is going to be the western portion of the empire. And then what, I know you can't quite differentiate the colors necessarily, but you have 2 parts. You have a purple part there between the Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea. That is modern day Turkey. That's purple. And down there you can see the divide between, on the African, North African side, you can see that nicely between Egypt and Africa. So the big bold typeface says. That's all that is the Diocletian's territory, ruled from Byzantium. And then you have this pink area that's ruled by Diocletian's Caesar, so his junior emperor on the east. And then in the green, you have Maximian, the Augustus for the western part of the empire, capital there in Rome. And then here, the yellow portion of the territory, you have Constantius. Can you see that? Can you read the small typeface there? Constantius is ruling as the Caesar in that yellow portion. Constantius, by the way, is going to be the father of Constantine the Great, whom you, of course, will recognize from general knowledge or your textbook reading. With this system of the Tetrarchy, we can see clearly where East is divided from West. East had been dividing from West for some time. What were some of the reasons why Diocletian would have created a divide down the middle? of this map that we have up above. What were some of the cultural differences going on? Can you think of any? The single most significant culture difference dividing these territories would have been what? Braden, please.
Would it have been Latin Greek?
Yes, that is your largest cultural divide. Yep. Your western portion there speaking Latin, your eastern portion speaking predominantly Greek. If you look at the church fathers, for example, all of the church fathers writing in Rome speak Greek up till about 235 with the death of Hippolytus. Somewhere in the 3rd century, Latin will become the primary language of the church in Rome. But up to this portion of time, that's all straddling this divide here between East and West, if you will. Okay. Now, continuing our story of the decline of Rome and the fall of Rome, some really good stuff happens immediately around this time. So Diocletian is remembered as a terrible persecutor of the church, which he certainly was. He instigated the worst persecution that the early church had ever seen. They called it the Great Persecution. From 303 to 311, this time of terrible persecution of the church. Manuscripts of the scriptures were systematically sought out and burned. It was a death penalty for denying full allegiance to Diocletian. So the statement Jesus is Lord, etc., was punished very, very severely. Absolute allegiance to the state was required. This is a terrible time for the church. And you can see, if you're trying to understand what Diocletian is doing, part of what's happening at this time is he's desperately reaching for trying to shore up political power into the state. There's this desperate attempt to try to get Rome to operate as a single political unity. And this is a terrible time for the church in the Roman Empire. Now, something really good happens shortly thereafter, and that, of course, is the coming of Constantine. Constantine, coming to power with his victory at Milvian Bridge in 312, Constantine is going to defeat Maximian, and he's going to become sole ruler of the Roman emperor. And for a time, there's going to be a reunited Rome. There hadn't been a single Roman empire that under whose authority the entire Roman Empire had been. There hadn't been that since 274, something like that, and had been patchy since the 260s. So this is really an amazing accomplishment that Constantine is able to bring up the entire empire back into one political body, and that's not going to last very long. He has 3 sons, as I've mentioned to you, Constantine II, Constantius, and Constans. Great names for your sons. His empire is going to divide into 3 different parts and is going to be reunited under Theodosius II. You remember this guy. He's the guy who makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire in 380. Right? Theodosius II is going to be the last Roman emperor to rule over the entire empire. So you can see then through this complicated set of affairs, really since the crisis of the 3rd century, there's a lot of ups and downs that's going on concerning the political unity of the Roman Empire through this whole period of time. Constantine, although he does a lot to reunify the empire, and he's a deeply loved emperor. There's a tremendous influx of loyalty to the empire following Constantine. There's a lot of Christian nobility who are really excited about what's taking place during this time. So this is a very good time for Roman patriotism, if you will. But unwittingly, too, not all of Constantine's moves help give long-term stability to the empire. One of the ways that we can see this is in 330, in 330 AD, Constantine moves the capital of his reunited Roman Empire. He moves it from Rome to Byzantium, or modern-day Istanbul. And he renames the city after himself. He calls it Constantine City, or Constantinople, which it's called until up to modern times. Okay, where is this on our map? Again, I'll throw the marker up. No. You can see Rome there. You know where to find that. Where's Constantinople on this map? Drive down to the Black Sea, what they call the Bosphorus there, that channel that goes between the Black Sea down to the Mediterranean Sea, and you can see Byzantium perhaps there. That's the old name for the city that Constantine's going to move his capital to. Now, Constantine is operating as a shrewd politician. He's doing this for political reasons, and there's political advantage to doing this. He finds this to be a more advantageous center of political power. And that should tell you how things are going as well. This is considerably further east in the empire than Rome. Now, what would that do to Rome as a capital city? What happens when you move your capital? Well, Rome becomes very much more, how shall we say, on the edge, so much more marginalized than previously. Take this as an example, perhaps it'll bring it home for us here in the Northwest. What would happen if you're imagining sort of the economic and political influence of Seattle in our state, what would happen if Microsoft and Amazon and Boeing all moved to Spokane? What would that do to the relative balance of power between these cities? Something completely unthinkable, right? First of all, how would you host all of those businesses in a smaller city and so on? But something like that is taking place when Constantine moves his imperial structure from Rome and his administrative system from Rome to Byzantium. You have this enormous transfer of power. Your imperial posts are the best paying, most stable positions. So a huge part of your economy is suddenly pulled out of Rome and heading and packing off to Byzantium. Also, for something like that to happen, your capital city you want to keep in great condition. This is the place, it's like, you know how cities really spruce themselves up when the Olympics comes there or something like that? I remember driving down, this was back in the late 90s, I was driving through Beijing, and I forget what year it was that Beijing had hosted the Olympics, but it would have been just a couple years, maybe 92, 93, somebody got it, something like that, early 90s. Anyway, we were driving down this road getting into Beijing, and it was miles after miles of these beautiful trees. It was like this arbor way, or this parkway that they had constructed. And we were told that was all just built for the Olympics, so that there'd be this nice, very impressive entryway to Beijing for those coming to watch the Olympics. And you've heard of the other things that they'll do to cities to beautify them in preparation for the Olympics. Well, that's what your capital city does in antiquity. It's this very impressive space that needs to be kept in tip-top condition because you're constantly running meetings and meeting with what we would call heads of state of other places and so on. It's a place of high political influence that needs to be kept in the very best of physical conditions to run all of your administrative systems. So suddenly Rome was cut out from all of these ongoing improvements, and Byzantium was suddenly receiving all of this improvement as capital of the empire. So even here too, if we're talking about the fall of the western portion of the empire, and remember that's what 476 is, we're not speaking of the fall of the eastern portion, and you can see very clearly what are we referring to when we speak of eastern or western portions of the Roman Empire. This too, Constantine's move of the capital from Rome to Constantinople, i.e. from west to east on our map, also helps explain why the western portion of that empire is going to collapse in 476. All right, do you have any questions? Let's take a question or two and we'll get back to this, but I'm going to give you your first break in a moment. Do you have any questions? Do we have any questions that have come in on the overhead there, Chase? Okay, thank you. How does the height of Rome compare to the EU in population? And also, why doesn't your map include farther Middle East, Persia, Babylon? Okay, that's great. Well, I'll take the second part of the question. Actually, I'll just go in the order that you've given me there. The usual number for the total population of the Roman Empire is about 60 million. So that's the ballpark figure that many historians will refer to. Now, to put that in terms of modern numbers, Germany, I think today has about 82, 83 million people, something like that. So the whole Roman Empire could pack into less than the area of Germany today. If your map of Europe includes Russia, at least parts of Russia there, Eastern Russia, I think you get up to in the 700 million, something like that, for the European continent today. Check it on Wikipedia or something like that to verify. But we're looking at a ratio of nearly 8 to 1, 9 to 1, something like that, concerning the population of ancient Rome compared to the same. Well, it's tricky because, of course, this doesn't the ancient Roman Empire doesn't map over the EU, but if you were to compare that, you'd get something like to an 8 to 1 ratio. Then secondly, why doesn't the map include farther to the Middle East, Persia, and Babylon? That's a great question. I respect that question a great deal. Still, for whatever reason, Roman history is taught kind of its own thing. And so if we were to go to Babylon, we'd be speaking of Parthian history, which is surely very interesting, but for whatever reason, and it might not be something that we'd want to continue to justify as we try to increase a global perspective, but usually Roman history is taught as its own thing. So good. Any other questions? All right. Well, let's take a 10-minute break. Let's take a 12-minute break. Come back at 8:50 and we'll pick it up there. Thank you. Chase, will we have a quiz? Yes, a quiz? All right, folks, I've received word from the upper deck that we're going to be having a quiz in a moment or two, so go ahead and find your seats maybe just a hair before 8:50, and we'll get started in a moment. Is Blackboard doing any better in this room, or does it still take like 10 minutes to submit your quizzes? We all set for a quiz? Not yet. Remember, if you need extra time, you can jot your answers down on the piece of paper on the side and then enter them later. Chase, it's all over to you.
All right, so this is quiz 1. Like I said last week, don't do quiz 2. All right, question 1. So if you don't have your Blackboard up, go ahead and just write down your answers and submit them at some point in the next hour or so. So question 1. What is the traditional date of the fall of Rome? Speaking of the western part of Rome. Was it A, 387, B, 432, C, 476, D, 511, or E, 649? All right, question 2. Roughly, how long did the fall of the Roman Empire take? This is again speaking of the western portion. Was it A, around 200 years, B, almost 500 years, C, only 15 years, D, about 140 years, or E, slightly more than 300 years? This is just speaking of the western part. Good. Question 3. What is the Tetrarchy? Was it A, the monarchical rule of Diocletian, B, the empire was split into 4 regions, C, the emperor began building taller buildings, D, Rome began taking over the Germanic tribes and expanding the empire, or E, a unification of the 4 major regions? All right, question 4. Who defeated Maxentius?
Maxentius. Yep.
Maxentius. Was it A, Diocletian, B, Domitian, C, Constantine, D, Theodosius II, or E, Maximilian? All right, and last question. Where does Constantine move his capital city? Was it A, Jerusalem, B, Rome, C, Germany, D, Spain, or E, Byzantium?
Thanks so much, Chase. Chase, I don't know if it's possible. Is it possible for you to control this screen as well? because I'm just noticing some of the people on this side of the room are struggling to see the questions. And so if it is possible, it'd be cool for you to broadcast the questions on both sides.
Yeah, we'll make that happen during the next quiz.
Sweet. Hey Chase, do you think we could get Caitlin in Hebrews to agree to having like a closed circuit TV there, so that like people that are, because a number of people are like finishing up buying coffee and they come back to the break, so they could like be answering the quiz on their phones on some sort of TV you could broadcast on the cafeteria. Do you think Caitlin would put up with that?
I think they need to get their coffee sooner.
Oh, okay, sorry. And I don't think Caitlin would buy it, but all right. Welcome back to class, folks. Thank you, Chase, for that great quiz. All right, so we've left off, the Roman Empire is falling, and the place that we are in the story now after the crisis of the 3rd century, and then we have the Tetrarchy, and Diocletian sort of patches power together through this division of 4 parts of the Roman Empire, and then Constantine comes, gets the whole thing back into one political body, but it's a frail political body. It breaks apart again after his death, with his sons taking different parts of the empire. And he moves the empire, the capital of the empire, to the east, to Byzantium. So as we're anticipating the fall of the western portion of the empire in 476, we can see a whole fleet of reasons why there's an enervation or a weakening of this western portion of the empire. Where we are in the story now is we're getting increased hostility from the Germanic tribes up here to the north as they're coming down up onto this vulnerable border here that cuts across what we think of as northern and southern Europe. Now, so we could speak of the barbarian invasions. Now, there is a larger story that's taking place here. We know the story is the barbarian invasions, and that's ultimately what's going to deplete the resources of the western portion of the empire and ultimately going to lead to the collapse. That's the way we know the story. But I do want to tell you that there's kind of an inter-European spat that's going on behind the surface here. So this is the way that Italian historiographers have remembered this history. Let me introduce you to the idea that German historians remember the story a little bit differently, and I think it's enlightening. I was at my first German-speaking academic conference in Vienna in 2007. It was a cold January, and I was there for the Patristische Arbeitsgemeinschaft, which is a group of German scholars who get together, I think every year, maybe every other year, something like that, for work on patristics. And it's outside of a patristics group that meets in Chicago or Oxford. It's the largest patristics group in the world. So there was, I don't know, 150, 200 scholars there, something like that. A nice large group. And I was attending one of the plenary sessions, and the speaker kept using a word that I couldn't understand. They were talking about this immigration of the peoples, and I wasn't sure what they were speaking about. So I took it back to my roommate that evening, who is a young scholar and a native German speaker, and brought this term back to him and said, what is this term, immigration of the peoples, that the main speaker was using there? I didn't understand what he was talking about. So my roommate very patiently and kindly starts giving me some different stories to try to help me unpack what that meant, and he's trying to frame it up for me in a historical context. And then it finally clicks with me. Oh, what these German historians remember as the immigration of the peoples, I've been taught as the barbarian invasions. It just depends on who you are. Why would German historians call this the barbarian invasions, for crying out loud? Is that the way you'd want to refer to your people? Come on. So now there is some truth to what's going on here. Is they call it the immigration of the peoples. Okay, so were these long-haired German barbarians that we see in the film Gladiator? They just had nothing better to do with their time than to go sort of razz the Roman guards. Is that what's going on here? Well, actually, no. It's part of a much larger immigration that we don't know everything about, everything that we'd like to know about. It seems to have to do with emigrations of what we would think of as Far Eastern peoples through Mongolia, pressing up against these Germanic tribes as well. So it looks like there was a whole continental-wide migration that was taking place. And we can't exactly map out exactly what's going on. We can think of it as the Hunnic peoples here are moving over, and these Germanic tribes are sandwiched up between these Hunnic peoples out of Mongolia and elsewhere, and what we think of as the Roman Empire. So there's this very large demographic shift that's taking place, and we remember it as the barbarian invasions. So be it from an Italian perspective. But don't think that's the only way to read this. I just want to make you aware of that. Now, these Germanic tribes do start getting too close for comfort for the Roman Empire. We have a number of sackings that take place. What I mean by that is here in 410, Alaric sacks Rome, comes into Rome and sacks it. Now this sacking is not, it's surprisingly short what happens here. It's for 3 days, Alaric and his troops rip through the city, taking what they would, and leaving the city in a general state of distress. Now this is a very significant moment because it shatters in the consciousness of the Roman people, it shatters the sense of invincibility that they had. Jerome, who's all the way over here in Bethlehem, he's hiding away in his cave, translating the Vulgate and doing whatever else holy monks of the day did. He hears news of this. Jerome, this highly literate Roman citizen, hears this news and says, the city that conquered the whole world has itself been conquered. And it really is hard for us to imagine what this would have meant. Rome, the city founded in 753, had not been penetrated for about 800 years at this point. Okay, so like 4 times the length of American history, nearly. It's inconceivable for us. It's inconceivable what this would have been like for the Roman citizens to experience this. Now, ultimately, the city of Rome looked quite a bit like it did before the sacking took place. So not all was lost, but this was an enormous change of thought for the people of the day. And this wasn't the only time that Rome was sacked. Now, I'll describe to you in a moment the people who sack Rome, these Germanic tribes, the Visigoths, had in fact been Christianized at this point. We'll talk about this later before we release today. And Augustine will write about this too in the first book of his City of God. The sacking could have been a whole lot worse. The people, these Germanic tribes who came in and run over the city are in some way restrained by a virtue that they would not have otherwise had except through this Christianization process that took place a number of years earlier under Ulfilas. So we'll describe that in a moment. Just footnote that in your mind. This wasn't the worst of all possible scenarios, but the unthinkable happens in that Rome is broken through. Its military can't even defend its own capital. And that, the unthinkable happens. And it's not the last time that this happens. In 452, we have a near sacking. Attila the Hun comes right up to the gates of Rome, and actually, Leo I, bishop of the city, is able to persuade Attila the Hun to go away. Now, how in the world did he do that? Well, in Christian memory and in hagiography, it's attributed to his tremendous spiritual authority, which is not entirely untrue. The fact is that the Bishop of Rome at this time in the middle of the 5th century did sense a responsibility for the citizens of Rome. That much is self-evident, and was able, by whatever means, to convince Attila the Hun to go away, to take his troops and leave and forego this looting of the city. So that much is true. The story that we've received makes it sound like it was due to his rhetorical brilliance and spiritual authority, and there was some of that probably, but I think he also took sacks and sacks of gold with him and convinced Attila the Hun to go away that way. Now, but all could not be stopped. In 455, we have another sacking of Rome that takes place, and this one lasts 14 days and is quite a bit more brutal. So this city is quite humiliated. And then ultimately, we're just a few years away from 476, which we give as the fall of Rome And what happens with the fall of Rome? So Rome was in a bad way. So much is true. But what actually happens with the fall of Rome? Why we date this as the fall of Rome is because Odoacer, this barbarian king, or this Germanic chieftain, we should say, deposes Romulus, who was technically the Roman emperor at the time. And this Romulus is the last Italian Roman emperor to rule over Rome. And we have a Germanic chieftain reigning in his stead. So I'll leave it between the Germans and the Italians to figure out what really happened. I think they both have great coffee and they have a lot in common in today's society. But back as we look at this part of the history of Western civilization, Western historians of the last several hundred years have looked to this moment in 476 and called it the fall of Rome. It's the last Italian-born Emperor Romulus to be reigning over what was left of the Roman Empire. And it's true, the Roman Empire had been atrophying and shrinking for a good long while. So now, but the citizens in the street, I don't want to overemphasize the importance of this date, although it's an important date. The citizens living in Rome, they would have probably heard the news. Their daily lives would not have terribly changed a great deal. Their daily lives would have pretty much gone on the way they had been. Good. Now, why did Rome fall? This is what we mean when we're talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. Why did Rome fall? This is a very complex question. If you dig into the scholarly sources, there are no fewer than 200 published reasons for why the Roman Empire fell. And it's probably right that we treat the question with a lot of detail and sophistication. We're talking about something that took hundreds of years and covered in modern cartography, dozens of countries. This is a big political reality. Still, I will present to you my favorite 6 reasons for why the Roman Empire fell. I think there might be, throughout the 6 reasons, we might find a little outline of the answer, but of course, I don't need to apologize again for the complexity of what we're talking about. None of these answers will exactly get at the whole reality. But let's start with the reason that the pagans themselves gave. And when I say pagans, these are going to be the opponents of Christian society in the 5th century. They claimed that it was the Christians that caused the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, I offer this first because I think it'll be interesting to us as theology students. I think we'll have a special interest in dealing with this question, so I've fronted it first. But I want to say that when we as modern people approach the question, and when we hear that the pagans said that Christians were responsible in some measure for the fall of the Roman Empire, just beware, we will ascribe a whole different set of reasons than they did in antiquity. We may be saying the same thing, Christians are somehow responsible for the fall of the Roman Empire, but we're going to be ascribing very, very different reasons. In antiquity, the reasoning ran as follows. Through their forms of worship, the Christians have stolen away the worship of the pantheon. No one's worshiping these classical deities anymore. We're not giving Jupiter and his lot the worship that he deserves, and so he's abandoned us. Well, that kind of rings hollow today. Really? And it rang hollow in antiquity. Augustine, in his City of God, pardon my scratchy handwriting, Augustine in his City of God, Book 1, deals with this question and tears it to shreds. It doesn't make any sense at all. It never did. So if your gods are so helpless, this is Augustine's reasoning in Book 1 of the City of God, if your gods are so helpless and so fickle that they'll just leave you, what kind of gods were they in the first place? The gods couldn't defend Troy from its downfall. So what made us think that even the gods could have defended Rome? These were impotent, meaningless deities in the first place. That's Augustine's reasoning. And Augustine, in his characteristic style, traces out every possibility and runs down every possible avenue for further exploration and intellectual exercise. And as he approaches this question too, he just rips the whole thing to shreds. It doesn't make any sense at all. Now, today, when we moderns reflect on whether Christianity and the rise of Christianity had anything to do with the fall of the empire, we ascribe a whole different set of reasons to that same idea. And we might wonder, Christianity, with this worship of a universal God, did it somehow lessen the exclusive allegiance to the Roman Empire? Well, that to us today might be an interesting question. Christianity has this universal, global, if you will, outlook. It's somehow in the DNA of the religion itself, that God, because God is a universal God. God is the God not just of us, although we may act like that or be inconsistent in our reasoning, but we ascribe that God is not only our God, but also the God of all kinds of peoples whom we don't know or understand. And if that's true, then what does that mean about our potential relationship with those people? That's in the core, in the DNA of Christianity itself. Did that have anything to do, that impulse have anything to do with a lessening of allegiance to Rome? Well, that would be interesting to explore, but we'd be doing it with a whole different set of logic than the Romans themselves asked. All right, I've got 6 reasons here for you, so let me lay some others here up on the board. What about the barbarians? I'll keep using this language. Barbarian, by the way, doesn't have to be pejorative. It just means somebody who doesn't speak Greek. So be it. Yeah. Was it because of these people who didn't speak Greek, like they were speaking Proto-English or something like that, Old English? Well, okay. This influx of barbarians, as it were, up here in the north, and this continued long-term, inveterate struggle with the peoples of Northern Europe against the peoples down here in the southern parts of Europe, that is one of the obvious first reasons we should look to for why Rome ultimately lost its political edge. Was it exhausted? Was it just politically exhausted? And not just economically depleted or something like this, but was it as these peoples constantly came into greater contact over a period of 150 years, was there somehow a lessening of the motivation for why we would keep fighting these boundaries and keep defending these old boundaries of Rome? Good question. Was it 3, economic depression? That was interesting as well. What do we mean by this? Well, even in Nero's day, if you rewind history back to the middle of the 1st century, the empire was sinking into a pile of debt. And instead of increasing exports so as to ensure that there was some sort of balance of assets and liabilities, as we'd say in modern accounting terminology, what does Nero do? Brilliant man that he is, he begins reducing the percentage of silver in the coinage. So eventually what we have in a supposedly 100% silver coin actually is only 1 or 2%. And people lost confidence in the money. Eventually there's increased bartering, and the whole thing just sort of unravels. Now, I'm fascinated by this answer, just because our modern society tends to look to economic realities as controlling factors for larger social questions. That's part of what it means for us today to be modern people, at least it seems to me, that we have a particular interest in economic realities. And this is very interesting. This is very interesting to the approach of the question of what happens with this fall of the Roman Empire. There is something very powerful that's happening here. I don't know if this is a full explanation, but it does deserve further exploration. What is money? You thought about that one recently? What is money? I like to think of money in this regard. Money is some sort of social game that we've invented that allows you not to have relationships with people. Okay? Now, there's some reality to it. Don't take me as a political reality. I'm playing a game with you. But there's some truth to this. We use money in most contexts with people with whom we want to reserve the right not to have a relationship. So if I'm transacting business with someone, we use money to exchange that, and money has an anonymity about it. It's an anonymous placeholder of sorts, so that we can exchange it freely between one another. And if we all have confidence in money, it will work. If we lose confidence in money, if you start thinking that your money won't be accepted, the whole thing breaks down rather quickly. And we can see this take place in different societies. My in-laws, as you know, are from Germany, and my father-in-law was born in 1942, so he has memories of the immediate period after World War II from a German perspective. It's very interesting to talk to him about these things. He remembers when people, in order to buy a small quantity of goods, would need to bring a whole wheelbarrow full of money to do that. Why? Why would you need so much money to buy something small like your groceries? Well, because inflation, because people lost confidence in money. So inflation went crazy. And then your money, even there are stories about money at the beginning of the day, inflation being so high that if you used your money at the beginning part of the day, you would get a significantly larger quantity of goods in exchange rather than the later part of the day, because the confidence in money is so lost. This is a very interesting dynamic. Economics can even be weaponized. Again, to use World War II as a laboratory example for this. There's this great film, I can't necessarily recommend that you see it, but for historical reasons it's interesting, called The Counterfeiter. The Counterfeiter, it's a German film that came out, I don't know, not too long ago, maybe in the 90s or early 2000s, and it's a true story. It's meant to be a true story of a Jewish counterfeiter who was so good at his work counterfeiting money that he was, the Nazis got a hold of him and wanted him to see if he could crack the English pound. So this was part of a Nazi operation. The goal of the operation was to crack the pound such that the bills that they were producing in this counterfeit situation would be accepted by the Bank of England. This is the strategy. And as soon as they get to that point, the Nazis wanted to fly over England to just dump barrels and barrels of this fake money. What would that have done to the society? Would have unwound it, was the thinking. Because what happens if everybody suddenly has millions of pounds? Nothing works. If people's confidence in this system is broken, the whole thing unravels, because people aren't willing to cooperate anonymously for a presumed promise of getting return later. The whole thing breaks down. So in a large sense, could we look at some sort of economic depression as a cause for this? Well, yes, if what we mean by that is people stop cooperating on a broad scale and confidence in money is lost. And that's what things like debt crises and so on do to a society. So was it economic depression? I think that's a very interesting possibility. What about corruption? Okay. And I'll star this because as far as the Romans themselves, during the contemporary, well, yeah, here too, these three theories certainly were part of the thinking and questioning of the people during their own time. Corruption. If you read Suetonius's Lives of the 12 Caesars, any of you do that for high school maybe? Anybody read Suetonius's 12 Caesars? No one? Okay, put it on your Christmas list. Get onto Amazon right now and buy it. Actually, in this context, I'm not sure if I should advise you reading it. It's a pretty wretched book. It's actually pretty filthy. But the reason why, so I do need to be careful with you there, but the reason why is because it's the point of the author to explain how absolutely corrupt and wretched these emperors were. That's the point of the author. Suetonius is writing to tell you how totally debauched these Caesars are. And he puts together a pretty compelling case. You're going to finish reading this book thinking these are a bunch of no good people. That's his goal. And when you look at highest political officials who are spending wads of money and their authority on completely worthless, self-fulfilling, pleasurable, debauched activities, what do you think is going to happen to your broader society? What's going to happen? This is going to be a terribly, first of all, you're giving out your resources, your precious, scarce resources on things that don't benefit your general populace. Secondly, you're just dragging down society as a whole. The value system that you're propagating and expect and sharing with the broader society, the value system that you're broadcasting is totally unhelpful. This is not going to reproduce a healthy society, and it didn't. All right, reason number 5. And I think this is mostly a joke, but there might be something to it. And an older tellings of the fall of the Roman Empire really made a big deal of this. So I like to be respectful of historical things. And okay, the story used to be told this way. Maybe there is something to it. The Romans used lead piping. And so it may be that your Romans, especially your upper class, were poisoned, lead poisoning. Lead poisoning can affect the body in a whole bunch of terrible different ways, but probably most prominent is it can affect cognition and reproduction. And so some scholars would look at this and say, aha, that's why Caligula was crazy, and that's why the Romans stopped having kids. I think it's more complicated than that. But there might be something to this. There might be something to this. There was a population crisis of sorts, and those things are very complicated. In European society, too, you'll hear people talk about a population or demographic winter, is what people call it. So these are things that are not foreign to our current societies. What causes demographic winter? What causes a society as a whole to stop wanting to have big families? That's really complicated. There's a lot, I mean, there's a million stories for that, right? But somehow it happens. Somehow those trends can be documented, and you can see those things happening. There are large-scale changes that take place there, but what causes them, or how do people come to those conclusions? I don't know. Did lead poisoning have anything to do with that? No, I'll offer it to you as a reason that used to be cited quite often. And there was something to the failure, if you will, of the Roman society as a whole to reproduce in a prolific way. Caesars eventually resorted to trying to offer big rewards for people. So like public honors. If you have a big family, we'll like publicly honor you depending on the number of children you have and stuff like this. Forced marriages. Oh yeah, we're going to do all kinds of stuff to get people to start having children again. It didn't work. Probably wouldn't work in any other context either, but it did have to do with the ultimate enervation of the empires as a whole. Lastly, and I just put this up as a generic term. What I mean by imperialism is this: maybe empires just have a life cycle. Maybe there's just a natural life expectancy, as it were, to an empire over a particular geography. And here's how this theory runs. Empires, as they grow, as they increase their boundaries, they gain resources, okay? So the more territory, and any player of Risk or some other board game like that would probably understand these things. As you extend your boundaries, you gain resources. You gain people resources, human resources. You gain material resources, forests, mines, etc. You're gaining resources. But as you gain resources, there's also increased expenditure for administering that area as a unity. So, and at first, you gain a lot more than you expend, because you gain obvious gains. You gain people that sort of can work together anyway and require less administration, and sharing the same language, and you're all eating the same lentil soup for dinner. So when you get homogeneous groups together, there's maybe less administration required. Who knows? As your empire grows, eventually it costs more and more to administer this enormous, sprawling empire that's covering dozens of languages and stretching all the way to the Far East or the Middle East and so on. And your revenues from that are going to decrease. And maybe there's just a natural life cycle in an empire. Maybe just no empire can last forever. And all empires will eventually outgrow their ability to effectively administer themselves. All right, scholars, I've thrown up some reasons for you. Here are six possible reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire. First, let's take a question or two on the overhead if we have them, and then I'll take questions from you in person. We'll chat this through quickly. I'd like you to have the opportunity to quickly bat these around and reflect on these. What do you make of these? I want to hear from you. Any questions here, Chase? Excellent. Why was the capital moved? Great. So that's a good question. Thanks, Braden. I think we were in line talking about that. Yeah, good. So from Rome to Byzantium. So the ins and outs of it, I don't know. But I think I have confidence in Constantine here that he would have made a shrewd political move. He must have been doing this for perceived political advantage. Perhaps already at this time, Rome was starting to look a little decrepit. And so moving to the Greek East made sense to him. I think also, if I've got this right, I think Constantine's native influence would have been greater in the West, his father having been Caesar up in what had been at one time the Gallic Empire up there in England. So I think his native influence was further to the West anyway, and he may have been trying to shore up power there in the East. Constantine, when he married in whatever it was, 307 or something like that, when he married, his wedding ceremony was in Trier, Germany. So many of his connections there and first part of his life, I think, were in the West. I think he was trying to get a little further east to sort things out. Okay, so I'm going to run around with the microphone and ask you if you have any reflections. And if you don't, we can make this quick. But I'd like to hear from you if you have ideas about the fall of the Roman Empire. And we'll start with Tim. Tim, do you want to pray for us today? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. It should be on. You know how to use a microphone.
Yeah, it says it's on, but okay. My question is regarding the postulation of Christians as being the reason for the fall of the Roman Empire.
Good.
If in fact the Christians were a big factor for the fall of Roman Empire, would it not make sense that the eastern part of Rome would have fallen first? Because the West does have Rome and stuff, but so does the East. Byzantium was a shelter for Christians in a large amount of mass too. Good.
No, that's a very important point you're making, Tim, so I appreciate that. And I'll repeat it because I don't think it came through on the microphone. Thanks, though. If Christianity had been in some way responsible for the fall of the Roman Empire, why wouldn't the eastern part of the Roman Empire have experienced that same weakening influence? Well, I think no matter how we discuss the relationship of Christianity to this question of the fall of the Roman Empire, it's important for us to articulate exactly what we mean. Because it's hard for us today, again, because we mean so very different things by what Christianity's potential influence was there. So in any case, I'd want us to articulate fully what do we mean by Christianity if it had something to do with the fall of the Roman Empire. But I take your point as a very good one. It would be not self-evident in the least. Thanks, Phil. Are you going to maybe give us a new battery or something? Great. Take that as a very good point, Tim. Let's take another question, but just shout it out there, Randy.
I think Christians a lot of times give the moral decay of any given. Hello. Oh, there we are. Great. Christians oftentimes give moral decay of, I guess, the emperors and the society itself as. I know growing up, that was kind of the only reason I actually heard from my church and stuff. What do you do anything with that? If not, how come? So on. Yeah.
No, I think it's very real, and it's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasoning processes that Romans themselves are wrestling with. So yes, I would say that has a lot to do with it. Moral decay itself is complicated because what is the degeneracy that we're speaking of? Why is it that there's something very real to that when a society experiences and can articulate moral decay, part of what they're saying is that the way we used to do things aren't the way we're doing things now. And so that in and of itself expresses loss of cohesion and loss of identity of a society. There's a breaking up that's taking place when people talk about moral decay. Whether or not they have a case that's objective and people would agree with, the fact that people are calling this thing moral decay means there's a loss of cohesion in the society. So I think in all cases, yes, that would be part of the story. There's a breakup that's going in that society. Yeah, and again, Suetonius, and we could look to others as well in Roman history as citing this as a problem. Charles, you're on.
To continue the line of thought as far as decay is concerned, what would it be fair to cite comfortability as a reason for decay? In the sense of being comfortable with the expanse in the military power and just the height, especially coming after the 5 good emperors, and just kind of this laxness, both militarily, because Rome was such a large military force, and then it kind of stops, and then all of a sudden they're getting attacked after years of like stability. Did they not foresee attacks, or I'm just trying to figure out why the sudden shift in the military power of Rome, because it doesn't seem as though it's a number issue in the sense of maybe the army. I don't think that there's an issue in the size of the army, but just maybe the alertness, the sharpness of the army.
Good. No, that is a reason that's cited too. Did the Romans somehow get soft, to paraphrase? That is a reason that's cited as well. I don't know how to grapple with that, just because I'm not exactly sure how I could demonstrate that. But we could point to a few spotty references there in Roman literature where this is the thought. So there must be something to that too. I just don't know how I would prove the case. That's good. That's good, Charles. So, all right, Jake, you got a question? I'd love to hear from you what your reflections are on these things.
So this may be lumped into Christians in general, but how does emperor worship tie in with the fall of the Roman Empire? Specifically, what I was thinking is you have Roman empires who are deified and worshipped, and then you have like Constantine who turns away from that, or maybe even before then, and starts worshiping the Christian God. So like, how does that fit into the fall of Rome, or does it?
Good. No, I think it does. So emperor worship is instigated in the 1st century, I think, for the first time. Really gets going in the later part of the 1st century. And from a Christian perspective, you can see that clash coming with Christianity in the book of Revelation, right? The monster in Revelation is the Roman empire that's deifying its emperors and worshiping these men as gods. That's kind of the backstory, probably, of the book of Revelation. So that was a broader Christian sentiment, that this was a terrible thing. And you can see how that ties into a Christian refusal to worship the emperor was interpreted as a failure of allegiance, a failure of patriotism. So that's the mechanism up against which Christianity comes. Now, so there was a critique of Christianity, and there was, on the part of certain emperors, persecuting emperors, that was probably the resentment against the Christian community. They're refusing to worship me as emperor, which means that they're refusing to give full allegiance to this realm, the Roman Empire. That does come into play. Now, Western civilization has such moved on that we would see this as a terrible infringement of all kinds of human rights, right of worship, right to freedom of thought and expression, etc. All kinds of bells and whistles go off in modern Western society when you look back at this ancient dynamic. That is how the Roman emperors were reviewing that and why they resented and were fighting against Christianity, probably. Good. Good. Other reflections? I'd, again, be interested to know your thoughts. Go ahead, please.
You said when an empire grows, that its resources expand, and then expenditures decrease per person, like everybody's eating the same things and cultural norms. But what's that downward arrow?
Sure. Good. So really, I guess if I were to name these arrows here, thanks, this first rising arrow would be resources that are gained from geographical expansion. This would be profits, or the total amount of goods and services and finances received over and above what it costs to administer this geographical territory. So that's declining. As the larger you get, the more your gains become marginal, because administration will cost an increasing amount for those gains. That's the idea. That's the theory that I've laid out. Good. Catherine, you have a question, and I'll wrap this to a close unless I can get some of you to grapple with these thoughts.
I've
further.
heard a lot of people say that it looks like the United States is kind of in the same cycle as Rome. I don't know, how much can you like predict a society going through the same cycle? I don't know. Or is there ever chances like societies where they end up not like stopping in the middle of it and like reversing, I guess?
That's very interesting. So I've taught this lecture now. Thank you, Catherine. I've taught this lecture since I came here to Moody in 2010, and every year it gets a little less funny. That's true. And every year, increasingly, people do ask, so what are the parallels with modern politics? That happens, Catherine. Good. I kind of shrug my shoulders. I'm not sure what to do. One, the historian in me thinks that these realities are so complicated and so unique in the genuine sense of the word that I resist drawing parallels to other societal developments, including our own. At the same time, it's pretty hard not to in some level, even if it's just an emotional level of, wow, I've heard this story before. So it's difficult, isn't it? I think I would hold to the fact that these are just such large, complicated realities. We couldn't draw simple parallels between this and any other societal development. Now, I think some can. So I'm a historian, I'm an ancient historian. If you want to ask me questions about Greek literature, I'll talk to you. But I'm not a sociologist. And to do something like the project that we're envisioning there, Catherine, I need some much more sophisticated sociological tools.